I stared at the black tracking device magnetized to the undercarriage of my sedan, the cold metal biting into my fingertips. On the phone. My son's voice dripped with fake concern as he asked where I was. He thought he was managing a helpless widow, but he had just declared war. He mocked my new husband as a penniless old fool, never suspecting that the man in the frayed coat was actually worth billions. My name is Marlene Whitaker, and at 58 years old, I thought I knew exactly what danger looked like. It usually came in the form of actuarial tables or liability clauses, the kind of things I spent decades analysing as a risk manager for Northbridge Civic Assurance. But standing in the damp, grey parking lot of the hospital, with the smell of wet asphalt filling my lungs, I realised I had been looking in the wrong direction. I reached under the rear bumper of my sedan, my fingers brushing against the cold, gritty metal until they found it. A small, plastic box. It was magnetized and blinking a faint red light. My phone vibrated in my pocket, shattering the silence. The screen flashed the name Gavin. I slid my thumb across the screen and pressed the phone to my ear, keeping my voice steady, betraying nothing of the freezing dread settling in my stomach. "Hello, Mom. Where are you?" Gavin's voice was tight, pitched just a little too high to be casual. "I stopped by the house to drop off those papers, but the driveway is empty." I looked at the tracking device in my hand, then back at the hospital entrance, where my husband was finishing a routine checkup. "I'm just running errands." "Gavin, why are you checking up on me?" "I'm not checking up on you," he replied, a defensive edge sharpening his tone. "I'm just worried. You've been elusive lately." I hung up without saying goodbye. For 3 years, ever since my first husband died, I had lived in the quiet, wealthy enclave of Wexford Harbour, Virginia. I had navigated the grief and the suffocating silence of a big, empty house. I thought I had survived the worst of it. Then I met Calvin Sutter. Calvin was over 60, a man who wore flannel shirts that had seen better days and drove a truck that rattled when it idled. He spoke slowly, moved deliberately, and possessed a stillness that grounded me, to the neighbours, and especially to my son. Calvin was a nobody, a charity case I had picked up to fill the void. I remembered the dinner last week, the one that started this cold war. We were seated at my dining table, the crystal glasses gleaming under the chandelier light, a stark contrast to Calvin's frayed cuffs. Gavin, 32 years old and wearing a suit that cost more than Calvin's truck, swirled his wine and stared at my new husband with open disdain. "Mom, be honest," Gavin had said, not even bothering to lower his voice. "Did you marry him because you were afraid of being alone, I mean? Look at him. He looks like he doesn't even have a credit card." The insult hung in the air, thick and poisonous. I waited for Calvin to defend himself, to list his accomplishments, or flash a temper. But he didn't. He just took a sip of water and looked at me. His eyes were calm, carrying a silent question. "Can you handle this?" "Marlene." I had smiled then, a polite, practiced smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Calvin makes me happy." "Gavin?" "That is enough." Gavin had scoffed, setting his glass down with a hard clink. "Happiness doesn't protect your assets. Mum, I'm just saying, we need to look at the trust again. I can help you manage things. We should review the will, maybe change the executor status. You know, just to be safe." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to that sickly, sweet register he used when he wanted something. "I can take the burden off you. You don't need to worry about the complexities of the estate. Let me handle the heavy lifting. I had spent 30 years in risk management. I knew the language of mitigation. I knew that when someone talked about protection and safety while demanding control, they weren't trying to shield you from the world. They were trying to shield you from your own autonomy. Gavin wasn't offering to carry the load. He was offering to put me in a cage. I am perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. Gavin, I had said, cutting a piece of steak with precise, surgical force. He had sat back, his eyes going cold, the mask slipping just enough to reveal the steel beneath. Now, standing in the hospital parking lot, I realized that dinner was just the opening move. I squeezed the tracking device in my palm. When I had asked him that night why he was suddenly so obsessed with my finances, he had smiled, a shark showing its teeth. Because, Mom, he had said softly, I don't want you to get lost. I met Calvin in the hushed, dusty corner of the library, at a volunteer program called Reading to Seniors. While other volunteers spent half their time networking or taking photos for their social media, Calvin just worked. He arrived 20 minutes early every Tuesday, stacking chairs and brewing coffee without saying a word. He wore flannel shirts that had been washed so many times they were soft at the elbows, and his hands were rough, mapped with the scars of hard labor. He didn't try to impress me. He didn't ask about my portfolio or my background at Northbridge Civic Assurance. He just sat next to me while I read poetry to a blind gentleman. And afterward, when I confessed how deafening the silence in my own house had become since my first husband died, Calvin simply nodded. He didn't offer platitudes. He just offered presence. When we decided to get married, we kept it small. A civil ceremony, a quiet dinner. Gavin arrived 40 minutes late, bringing a gust of cold air and judgment into the room. He didn't offer a toast. He didn't shake Calvin's hand. Instead, he cornered me near the coat check while Calvin was getting our coats. Mom, seriously? Gavin whispered, his eyes darting to Calvin's scuffed boots. What does he even do? Does he have a house? Does he have life insurance? Or is he just planning to settle into yours? That is enough. Gavin? I snapped. But he wasn't finished. He pulled me deeper into the hallway, his grip on my arm tight, almost bruising. I am just looking out for you. Look, I think we should sign a medical power of attorney. You know, just in case. In case of what I asked, my voice dropping. In case you get confused, he said, his voice dripping with that sickly, patronizing sweetness. At your age, stress can trigger things. Dementia. Cognitive decline. I just want to be able to make decisions if you lose your way. It was a slap in the face disguised as a caress. I pulled my arm away, but the seed was planted. Over the next few weeks, strange things began to happen. Small things, manageable things, until they weren't. My bank statements stopped arriving in the mail. I missed a cardiologist appointment because someone had called the office and rescheduled it for a date I never agreed to. Every time I left the house to meet a friend or go to the market, Gavin would call within 10 minutes, asking, "Where are you? Are you near the bank? Are you sure you are okay driving?" It felt like I was living in a glass jar, and he was the one tapping on the lid. Then came the text from Tessa, my former daughter-in-law. We hadn't spoken much since the divorce, but her message popped up on my screen late one Tuesday night. Be careful with what Gavin calls reasonable. It read. I stared at the screen, waiting for more. But nothing came. When I showed the message to Calvin, He didn't get angry. He didn't rant about Gavin's insolence. He just sat in his armchair, cleaning his glasses with the hem of his shirt. "Marlene," he said softly, looking up at me with those unshakable grey eyes. "Do not argue with a man who is building a stage. You will only exhaust yourself. We just need to change the lighting." I didn't fully understand him then, but I trusted him. I decided to start paying attention to the details, the little discrepancies I had been ignoring to keep the peace. I went out to my car, remembering that Gavin had insisted on taking it for maintenance 3 days ago because he claimed the brakes sounded soft. He had returned it with a smile and a bill he said he had already paid, telling me not to worry about reimbursing him. I opened the glove compartment and dug through the stack of napkins until I found the crumpled receipt he had left there. It was for $300, issued by a place called West End Auto on 4th Street. I frowned. I knew this town. I knew every street in Wexford Harbour. I pulled out my phone and typed in the address printed on the receipt. The map loaded, dropping a red pin on the location. My blood ran cold. There was no garage on 4th Street. The address led to an empty, overgrown lot behind an abandoned warehouse. Gavin hadn't taken my car to be fixed. He had taken it somewhere private, somewhere quiet, to do something he didn't want anyone to see. And looking at that fake piece of paper, I realized that my son wasn't just worried about me getting old. He was actively manufacturing my decline. I drove the sedan to a garage 3 towns over, a place called Miller's Automotive, where the coffee was stale and the mechanics did not care about my zip code. The head mechanic, a burly man wiping grease from his hands with a rag, waved me over to the lift. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, pointing a flashlight into the rear wheel. "Well, you said you had the brakes serviced last week. My son took it in," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Well," he grunted, tapping a plastic panel that looked slightly askew. "He didn't get your brakes done. The pads are the same old ones. But these clips here, they have been pried open and snapped back shut. Recently, someone was digging around in here, and it wasn't to fix anything." I paid him in cash and drove home, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. When I pulled into the garage, I did not go inside immediately. I popped the memory card out of my dashcam and plugged it into my laptop right there on the workbench. I scrolled through the dates. Every file from the day Gavin had borrowed the car to get it serviced was gone. The folder was empty, scrubbed clean. My heart hammered against my ribs, a cold, rhythmic thud. I changed into my gardening clothes and lay flat on the cold concrete floor, sliding underneath the rear bumper. I ran my hand along the metal frame, feeling for what I knew had to be there. My fingers brushed against something cold and smooth. A small, black plastic box, about the size of a deck of cards, held in place by heavy-duty magnets. It blinked a tiny, rhythmic red light in the darkness of the undercarriage. A GPS tracker. I did not rip it off in a rage. I pulled out my phone and took 4 clear photographs, capturing the device's position and the serial number printed on the side. Then, I carefully pried it loose. It came away with a heavy click. I carried it inside and walked straight to the linen closet, pulling down the old Danish cookie tin that my mother used to keep her sewing supplies in. I nestled the tracker among the spools of thread and rusty needles. Gavin would never look there. To him, that tin was just useless clutter. I went to my study and opened a fresh notebook. I fell back into my old rhythm from Northbridge Civic Assurance. I drew a line down the center of the page. On the left, I wrote down every time I had left the house in the last month. On the right, I logged every time Gavin had called or texted. The correlation was terrifying. If I went to the bank, he called within 15 minutes. If I drove to the lawyer's office, he texted to ask if I was feeling okay. Calvin walked in, setting a cup of tea on the desk. He looked at the notebook, then at me. He did not tell me to stop. He did not tell me I was paranoid. "You are building a case?" Calvin said quietly. "I am finding the pattern," I answered. He rested a hand on my shoulder. "Just remember one thing. Marlene, do you want to win with the truth, or do you want to teach him a lesson? Because those are two very different paths." "I want both," I said. I decided to test the system the next afternoon when Gavin stopped by to check the thermostat. I mentioned it casually while pouring him a glass of iced tea. "Oh, I almost forgot," I said, keeping my back to him. "I made an appointment with a notary for Friday morning. I think it is time to amend the will, make some changes to the beneficiary structure." The silence behind me was heavy. When I turned around, Gavin was smiling, but his eyes were darting around the room. "That seems sudden, Mom. Does Calvin know Calvin agrees it is for the best?" I lied. That night, my phone did not stop ringing. It was Gavin. I let it go to voicemail 3 times before answering on the 4th. "Mum," he shouted, his voice tight with panic. "Why aren't you answering?" "Listen, about Friday. I can drive you. Who is taking you? Is he going with you? I can drive myself." "Gavin, why are you shouting?" "I'm not shouting. I don't think you should be making legal decisions right now. You sound tired. You sound confused. I am going to bed. Gavin, good night." I hung up and sat in the dark living room, the adrenaline making my hands shake. I opened my laptop to check my email, but when the browser loaded, it did not open my inbox. It opened a secondary Gmail account that had been left logged in. I frowned. I had not logged into any other account. I moved the cursor to the profile icon in the corner. The name associated with the account made the breath catch in my throat. It was not my name. It was not Calvin's. The account name was G. Sutterplan. I clicked on the inbox. It was not an email account for chatting. It was a storage dump. And the Sutter in the name was not about honoring my husband. It was a target. I left my laptop open on the kitchen island, the screen glowing faintly in the dim afternoon light. It was a calculated risk, a piece of cheese left out for a rat. I told Gavin I was going upstairs to take a nap, complaining loudly about a migraine. Then I went into the bedroom, locked the door, and opened the app, connected to the tiny security camera Calvin had installed inside the range hood months ago. I watched on my phone screen as Gavin entered the kitchen. He did not look around for me. He walked straight to the laptop. His fingers moved across the keyboard with a terrifying familiarity. He was typing fast, attaching files, his face illuminated by the blue light of the monitor. He looked focused, efficient, and completely devoid of guilt. When he finally left the house 20 minutes later, I went downstairs and checked the browser history. He had cleared it, of course, but he had forgotten that the secondary email account, the one labeled G. Sutterplan, saved drafts automatically. I opened the sent folder. My breath hitched in my throat. He had sent a PDF file to an encrypted address. The subject line read, "Subject Assessment M.W." Update 4. I opened the document. It was not a letter. It was a dossier. It listed my current health status, exaggerating my minor forgetfulness into early-onset cognitive decline. It listed my schedule for the next month. It listed the estimated value of my home, my investments, and my life insurance policies. Every line felt like a knife slicing through the bond between mother and son. Then I found the main document, the one titled The Plan. It was a legal strategy drafted for a lawyer named Leland Crowe, objective guardianship via incapacitation. I whispered, reading the header. I scrolled down, my hand trembling. There was a subsection titled Invalid Marriage Activation. It detailed how they would paint Calvin as a predator, a man who had manipulated an emotionally unstable widow into a marriage for financial gain. They planned to freeze his access to the house and annul the marriage based on my lack of mental capacity at the time of the wedding. I closed the laptop. The air in the kitchen felt too thin to breathe. 2 hours later, I sat in a booth at a small coffee shop on the edge of town, across from Tessa. My former daughter-in-law looked tired. Her hands were wrapped tightly around a mug of hot chocolate, her knuckles white. I didn't want to come. "Marlene," she said, her voice shaking, "if Gavin finds out—" "He won't, I promised. I just need to know. You said to be careful." Why Tessa looked down at the table? Because Gavin doesn't handle no very well. When we were divorcing, he made me sign a paper admitting to a debt of $50,000 that I never borrowed. He told me if I didn't sign it, he would take the dogs. He knew I couldn't have children. He knew those dogs were my babies. He said he would have them put down if I fought him on the alimony. I felt a wave of nausea. He threatened the animals. "He enjoys the leverage," Tessa whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "He likes to find the one thing you're afraid of losing and holding it over your head." She unlocked her phone and slid it across the table. "He sent me this when he found out you were getting married." It was a screenshot of a text conversation. Gavin had written, "Don't worry about the inheritance. The old lady will sign whatever I put in front of her eventually. She is terrified of being abandoned. She'd rather be broke than lonely." I stared at the words. The grief I had felt for 3 years hardened instantly into something cold and sharp. He was using my widowhood, my deepest pain, as a tactical advantage. "Thank you, Tessa," I said, sliding the phone back. "You have given me exactly what I needed." "What are you going to do?" she asked. "You should just get a restraining order." "No," I said, standing up. "A piece of paper won't stop him. I want him to say it. I want him to admit everything, out loud, before I bury him." When I got home, Calvin was in the study. I told him everything. I told him about the dossier, Leland Crowe, and the text message about my fear of abandonment. Calvin listened without interrupting. When I finished, he didn't offer comfort. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark driveway. He pulled a burner phone from his pocket, a device I had never seen before. He dialed a number and waited. "Start the process," Calvin said into the phone. His voice was different, deeper, commanding, stripping away the simple old man persona entirely. "Yes. Follow the script. We are accelerating the timeline." He hung up and turned to me. "Get some sleep. Marlene, tomorrow is going to be a long day." I didn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to the wind against the glass. The phone rang at 8 in the morning. It was the fraud department of my bank. Mrs. Whitaker, the representative, asked. We are calling to verify a transaction. We received an expedited application for a second mortgage on your property about an hour ago. The amount is for $200,000. My hand gripped the phone. I did not apply for a mortgage. That is strange, the woman said. The application was submitted through your secure portal. It has your electronic signature on it, and the notary stamp looks valid. I looked at Calvin across the kitchen table. He was drinking his coffee, his eyes locked on mine. It has begun, I said to him, covering the mouthpiece. Gavin wasn't just planning anymore. He had started to liquidate my life. I walked into the bank with the icy composure I had cultivated over 30 years in risk management, though my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I sat across from the branch manager, a young man named Mr. Henderson, who looked too nervous to be dealing with potential fraud. He slid the loan application across the mahogany desk. Here is the document in question. Mrs. Whitaker, he said. I stared at the bottom of the page. There it was. Marlene Whitaker. It was not just a scribble. It was my signature. The loop of the capital M. The sharp, distinctive strike of the T. It looked so authentic it made my skin crawl. It looks exactly like mine, I said, keeping my voice steady. That is why the system flagged it only for the IP location discrepancy. Mrs. Whitaker, Henderson said apologetically. Otherwise, it cleared the biometric match. I left the bank with a copy of the document and immediately called Alyssa Baird. Alyssa was a forensic document examiner I had hired once during a corporate embezzlement case at Northbridge. She cost $300 an hour, but she was the best in the state. I need to know if a human hand wrote this. Alyssa, I told her over the phone as I sat in my car. I am sending you the digital file now. I will tear it apart, pixel by pixel. Marlene, she promised. If it is a forgery, I will find the seams. While Alyssa worked, I called Sarah, an old friend who still worked in the IT department at Northbridge Civic Assurance. I asked her to run a quiet check on the access logs for my personal insurance files. Marlene. This is odd, Sarah said after a few minutes of typing. Someone accessed your policy details beneficiaries, riders, cash value 3 times last week. The IP address traces back to a residential node in... Wait, isn't your son in Brentwood? Yes, I said, my stomach tightening. He is. He was not just guessing my worth. He was verifying it down to the last cent. I needed to see the architect of this plan face to face. I arranged a consultation with Leland Crowe, the lawyer mentioned in the Sutter Plan document. I played the part of the overwhelmed, aging mother perfectly. His office was sleek, smelling of expensive leather and intimidation. Mr. Crowe, I said, wringing my hands theatrically as I sat in his plush chair. My son. He thinks I need help. I am just so confused lately. I forget things. Numbers, dates. Leland smiled, a practiced expression that did not reach his eyes. Mrs. Whitaker, it is completely normal. We can set up a durable power of attorney. You just sign a few papers, and Gavin handles the headaches. Everything will be lighter for you. I decided to test his script. It is my new husband, Calvin, I whispered, leaning in. He is a financial burden. I worry he is just using me, but I don't know how to say no to him. Leland leaned back, a smirk playing on his lips. Men of that sort? They usually disappear when the money is not quite as accessible as they thought. If Gavin manages the assets, this Calvin might find the marriage less appealing. We could protect you from him. There it was. The narrative. They were going to cut off my funds to drive Calvin away, then claim they saved me from a predator to secure the guardianship. That evening, Calvin handed me a small velvet box. Inside was a plain silver band. "It is not a diamond," he said softly. "What is it?" I asked. "It is a microphone," he explained. "Press the inner rim twice. It records to the cloud. My lawyer says since Virginia is a one-party consent state, you are fine. But just to be safe in private meetings, announce it. Announce it. Say, 'I am recording this to help me remember.' It fits your confused persona, and it makes the evidence admissible in any court." I put the ring on. It felt heavy, like a weapon. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Alyssa. I opened the attachment she sent. Marlene. Her voice came through the phone a moment later, sharp and professional. I found the source, the signature on the loan. It is a digital composite. But the base image, the pressure points match a document from 3 years ago. A funeral home release form. I froze. Gavin had helped me with the paperwork when my first husband died. He had stolen my signature from the day I buried his father. He had been planning to rob me since the day he put his own father in the ground. The memory hit me like a physical blow while I was standing in the middle of my dusty attic. I remembered the week after my first husband's funeral, 3 years ago. I had been a wreck, barely able to get out of bed, and Gavin had been so helpful. He had sat at the dining room table with stacks of documents, saying, "Rest. Mum? I will scan these and send them to the lawyers. You do not need to worry about the paperwork." I had thanked him for being such a good son. I had thanked him for robbing me. I pulled down the heavy plastic bin marked funeral and estate. I popped the lid and stared inside. The files were usually color-coded and meticulous, my habit from 30 years in risk management. But now, they were chaotic. Papers were jammed in sideways. Staples were torn out. And the folder labeled death certificates and affidavits was sitting on top, bent and crinkled, as if someone had yanked it out in a hurry and shoved it back in without caring. He had needed my signature to practice his forgery, and he had come here to steal the template. I decided to test the depth of his desperation. Later that afternoon, when Gavin came over to check on me, I was in the kitchen, casually looking at a real estate brochure. "You know," I said, not looking up from the glossy photo of a condo in Florida. "I was thinking about selling this house. It is too big for just Calvin and me. We could downsize. Maybe travel a bit?" Gavin froze mid-step. The colour drained from his face, replaced instantly by a flush of anger. "You can't do that," he snapped. "Why not?" I asked, sipping my tea. "It is my house." "Because of the equity," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Do you have any idea what the market is doing right now? If you sell now, you lose the appreciation value. It is financially irresponsible. You are not thinking clearly." He did not mention the memories. He did not mention the treehouse in the backyard, or the height marks on the doorframe. He only talked about the house as if it were a stock option. That evening, Calvin took me to a small, greasy spoon diner on the edge of town. He ordered a black coffee and looked at me with an intensity that made me shiver. "You are wondering who I really am," Calvin said quietly. "I am wondering how a retired maintenance worker knows how to install hidden cameras and record encrypted conversations." I replied. Calvin smiled, a small, sad expression. I lived a different life before I met you. Marlene, in that life, I learned how to turn greedy people into witnesses, without them even knowing they were testifying. He did not elaborate, and for the first time, I realized that my husband was not just a shield. He was a weapon I did not yet know how to fire. He was too calm, too prepared. But I pushed the suspicion down. I had a bigger predator to catch. I initiated the reverse trap the next morning. I took the magnetic tracker out of my sewing tin and drove a rental car to a secluded spot behind the mall. I attached the device to the rental's undercarriage. Then, I spent 4 hours driving to every place a mother should not go. I parked for 45 minutes at the Golden Eagle Casino. I stopped at a pawn shop in the rough part of the city. I idled outside the office of a bankruptcy lawyer. I was pulling into my driveway when my phone buzzed. It was Gavin. "Mom, what are you doing? I am home." "Gavin? Why, I just had a feeling." He stammered, his voice tight with panic. I was worried. "You seemed erratic lately." "Were you near the casino today?" He had taken the bait. He was watching the dot on his screen move in real time, terrified that I was gambling away his inheritance. Then came the final piece of the puzzle. Tessa texted me a photo of a document she had found in an old box of Gavin's things she had never returned. It was a loan agreement, but not from a bank. It was from a company called Apex Solutions. It is a shell company for loan sharks. Tessa wrote, "He owes them $80,000. They are not the kind of people who send late notices. They send people to break legs. My son was not just greedy. He was drowning, and he was using me as his life raft." I showed the text to Calvin. He nodded grimly. Desperate men make sloppy mistakes. We just have to wait. We did not have to wait long. An hour later, a heavy knock echoed through the house. I opened the door to find a woman in a stiff grey suit standing on my porch. She held a clipboard and looked at me with a practiced, cold sympathy. "Mrs. Whitaker?" she asked. "Yes. My name is Agent Miller. I am with Adult Protective Services. We received an anonymous report concerning your welfare." She held up a photograph. It was a picture of me and Calvin walking in the park, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. "We have reason to believe you are being financially exploited," she said, stepping closer to the threshold. "I need to come inside and inspect the premises. Alone." I did not step back. I stood firmly in the doorway, blocking the entrance with my body. The woman in the grey suit, Agent Miller, tried to push past me with a polite aggression that made my skin crawl. But I held my ground. I snatched the laminated ID card from her hand before she could protest. I pulled out my phone and scanned the QR code printed on the back. It did not lead to the Department of Social Services database. It redirected to a generic error page hosted on a free website builder. "This badge is a forgery," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "And you are trespassing, Mrs. Whitaker." "You are confused," she said, her voice dropping the sympathetic act for a split second. "If you do not let me in to assess your safety, I will have to call the police and report an obstruction of a welfare check." It was a bluff, but a terrifying one. Just as panic began to rise in my throat, Calvin stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. He did not look like the gentle, impoverished old man Gavin despised. He looked like a monolith. "Who is your coordinating supervisor?" Calvin asked, his voice cutting through the humid afternoon air like a razor. "Give me a name and a badge number. I will call the precinct right now to verify your dispatch order." The woman blinked, her confidence faltering. She snatched her badge back, muttered something about filing a non-compliance report, and practically ran to her car. She did not drive a government vehicle. It was a beat-up sedan with no plates on the front. "They are building a dossier," I said, watching her speed away. "They want to prove I am uncooperative and mentally unstable, so the state will intervene. They are trying to trigger an emergency guardianship," Calvin said. "We need to see Ronan." An hour later, we sat in the back of a dimly lit office belonging to Ronan Pike, a private investigator Calvin knew. Ronan was a sharp-featured man who looked at paperwork the way a butcher looked at meat. He spread a series of financial printouts across the desk. "Mrs. Whitaker," Ronan said, leaning forward. "You are not just having a family dispute. You are currently the lead character in an accelerated incapacitation scenario." He tapped a highlighted name on the ledger, Harbour Knot Consulting. "This company," Ronan explained, "has been paying for everything. They paid the retainer for Leland Crowe. They paid for the fake medical assessment you found in the email. They even paid the woman who showed up at your door today. It is a shell corporation. Gavin is not working alone. He has signed a contract with a network that specializes in hunting seniors with high-value assets. They strip you of your rights, liquidate your estate to pay their fees, and leave you in a state-run facility." I felt a coldness settle deep in my bones. My son had not just betrayed me. He had sold me to a pack of wolves. "We have to stop them," I whispered. "We will," Calvin said. "But we have to make them think they have already won." I went home and started making calls. I invited the neighbors, our pastor, and a few old friends to a party. I called it a celebration of our 6-month wedding anniversary. I also told Gavin he had to come because I had a major announcement regarding the estate. The night of the party, the house was filled with music and laughter, a grotesque mask over the reality of what was happening. Gavin arrived early, wearing a suit and a tight, predatory smile. He watched me like a hawk. I waited until everyone had a glass of champagne in their hand. I stood by the fireplace, tapping my glass with a spoon. The room was quiet. "Thank you all for coming," I said, smiling at the crowd. "Calvin and I have been doing a lot of thinking. We realized that, at our age, managing wealth is a burden. So, I have decided to dissolve my current holdings and transfer everything into a new, irrevocable, blind trust." I saw Gavin's eyes widen. He looked at Leland Crowe, who was standing in the corner, uninvited but present. They exchanged a look of pure greed. A blind trust meant movement of money, and movement created opportunities to intercept. I gestured to a tall, impeccably dressed man standing next to Calvin. "This is Mr. Vane," I continued. "My new financial advisor. He will be handling the transfer next week." Gavin immediately beelined for Mr. Vane, introducing himself with that oily charm, trying to establish a connection, trying to find a way to infiltrate the new arrangement. Later, as the guests were mingling, Mr. Vane walked past me. He stopped for a brief second, pretending to admire the flower arrangement on the mantel. He leaned in close, his voice a barely audible whisper. He took the bait. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, "I am not a financial advisor. I work for the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Division. We can catch the entire ring, not just your son. If you are willing to play one more scene." I looked across the room at Gavin, who was laughing with the man he thought was his next victim. I raised my glass to my lips, hiding the trembling of my hand. "Tell me what to do," I whispered back. I played the part of the doting, slightly overwhelmed mother, with a precision that would have terrified my younger self. I called Gavin over to the house 3 times in 2 days, fluttering around the kitchen with stacks of papers I had fabricated with the help of Mr. Vane. "Gavin, honey," I said, pushing a thick binder across the island counter. "I need you to look at these bank options for the trust. My eyes are just not what they used to be. The fine print gives me such a headache." Gavin grabbed the binder, his fingers twitching with an eagerness he could barely suppress. "I will handle it. Mom, you just need to trust me. We need to move fast before the market shifts." He did not notice that the portfolio was a mirage. The account numbers were traps set by the FBI, monitored in real time. And buried deep in the bylaws of the fake trust document was a clause I had insisted on a provision that no assets could be liquidated without the notarized, biometric signatures of both spouses. Gavin was so focused on the total value over $4 million in imaginary assets that he skimmed right over the condition that required Calvin's permission. On Thursday, Leland Crowe arrived at my house with a man he introduced as Dr. Evans. They claimed it was a standard insurance formality, but I knew what it was. It was a competency hearing disguised as a casual chat. They sat me down in the living room. Calvin sat in the corner, staring at his hands, playing the role of the silent, useless husband perfectly. "Mrs. Whitaker," Dr. Evans said, clicking a pen. "Let us just go over some basics. Can you tell me what year it is?" I hesitated. I looked at the calendar on the wall, then back at him, letting my mouth hang open slightly. "It is... oh dear. Is it 2024, or did we just pass that?" Gavin exchanged a look with Leland, a look of triumphant pity. "It is fine, Mom," Gavin said, his voice dripping with fake reassurance. "Dates are hard. But I do worry about the money," I said suddenly, sharpening my gaze. "I know the bonds in the municipal account are maturing at 4.5%, and the property tax on the lake house is due in 14 days. That is $12,000. Dr. Evans blinked. He looked at Leland. "Well," the doctor said, closing his notebook, "she retains specific financial fixation, but lacks temporal orientation. It is a classic sign. She remembers the money, but forgets the day." Leland smirked. "That works for us, as long as she signs. Who cares if she knows it is Tuesday?" He turned to look at Calvin. "And what about him? Does he understand any of this?" "He is just furniture," Gavin muttered, not knowing the ring on my finger was recording every syllable. "As long as he gets a hot meal, he won't make a sound." Calvin did not flinch. He just traced the grain of the wood on the side table, his face a mask of dull acceptance, while his silence gathered evidence that would destroy them. The next morning, I executed the final distraction. I took the magnetic tracking device Gavin had planted on my car and drove to a truck stop on the interstate. I found a long-haul driver heading to Elkstone, Montana, and while he was inside paying for fuel, I slid the tracker onto the rear frame of his rig. Then, I turned off my phone, to Gavin, watching his screen. It looked like his mother had suddenly snapped. It looked like I was fleeing the state, taking the confused old husband and the assets with me. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Within 3 hours, my new lawyer, the real one, called me on the burner phone. He took the bait. "Marlene," she said, "Gavin just filed an emergency ex parte motion for temporary guardianship. He is claiming you are a flight risk and that Calvin is kidnapping you to cross state lines. He is asking the judge to freeze all assets immediately. I drove to the courthouse, entering through the back service entrance as instructed. I slipped into the back of the courtroom just as the hearing was starting. The room was cold, smelling of floor wax and old wood. I saw Gavin standing before the judge. He looked devastated. He was crying. "Your Honor," Gavin said, his voice breaking with a sorrow so convincing it made my stomach turn. "I just want to protect her. My mother is not well. She is being manipulated by a man who preyed on her loneliness. I love her so much. I cannot let her disappear." I closed my eyes, listening to him. It was the same soft, soothing tone I used to use when I sang him to sleep 30 years ago. It was the voice of safety. It was the voice of love. And he was using it to paint me as a senile invalid so he could strip me of my life. I gripped Calvin's hand in the darkness of the gallery. The game was over. It was time to turn on the lights. The emergency hearing was a suffocating theatre of cruelty. The courtroom was packed, the air conditioner humming a low, indifferent drone that did nothing to chill the heat rising in my cheeks. I sat at the defendant's table, my hands folded perfectly still on the polished wood. Across the aisle, Gavin refused to look at me. He was hunched over a notepad, whispering frantically to Leland Crowe. In that moment, the boy I had raised, the toddler I had nursed through fevers, and the teenager I had taught to drive, had vanished. In his place sat a litigator for his own greed, a stranger wearing my son's face. Leland Crowe stood up, adjusting his tie with the arrogance of a man who thought he had already won. He approached the bench, holding up a plastic evidence bag containing the GPS tracker I had placed on the truck. "Your Honor," Leland began, his voice smooth and practiced. "This device proves the extent of Mrs. Whitaker's paranoia. She claims my client is stalking her, yet we found this tracker registered to a serial number she purchased attached to a vehicle she believed was my client's. She is projecting her own instability onto a loving son who only wants to ensure she does not hurt herself." He then produced the letter from Dr. Evans. "We also have a medical opinion stating she suffers from significant cognitive drift and financial fixation. She is a danger to her own estate." I did not gasp. I did not object. I simply watched them, remembering Calvin's words from the night before. "Let them build the gallows. We just have to kick the lever." My lawyer, a sharp woman named Mrs. Sterling, stood up. "We would like to call a witness to the stand, Mr. Arthur Vane." Gavin's head snapped up. He recognized the name the financial advisor from my party. He smirked, likely thinking Vane was there to testify about my confused trust fund plans. "Mr. Vane took the stand. He did not look like a financial advisor anymore. He looked like an auditor. "Mr. Vane," Mrs. Sterling asked, "can you tell the court who pays your consulting fees?" "I am an independent forensic accountant," Vane replied, his voice carrying to the back of the room. "And my investigation reveals that the retainer for Mr. Crowe, as well as the fees for Dr. Evans, were not paid by Mr. Gavin Whitaker personally. They were wired from a shell entity known as Harbour Knot Consulting." The smirk vanished from Gavin's face. Leland stiffened. "And," Vane continued, "Harbour Knot Consulting receives 90% of its funding from liquefied assets of seniors currently under court-ordered guardianship." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge, a stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, narrowed her eyes at Leland. "We have more, Mrs." Sterling said. "I call Alyssa Baird. Alyssa walked up, projecting an image of absolute technical authority. She placed a projector slide on the screen. It showed two signatures, the one on the mortgage application and one from a funeral home document dated 3 years ago. The signature on the loan is a forgery, Alyssa stated flatly. It is a digital composite. My analysis shows the pixel degradation matches a scan taken from this specific document, the release form for Mrs. Whitaker's late husband. The metadata on the file shows it was created on the day Mr. Gavin Whitaker was alone in the defendant's home, ostensibly to help his mother sort through her grief. I looked at Gavin. He was pale, his hands trembling violently. He had used the death of his father to craft the weapon he was now using against his mother. The judge leaned forward, her voice like iron. Mr. Whitaker, I am ordering you to surrender your cellular device to the bailiff immediately for forensic imaging. We need to see your communications regarding this timeline. Objection, Gavin shouted, jumping to his feet. This is a violation of my privacy. You cannot just take my phone based on manufactured theories. It is not a theory. Mr. Whitaker. The judge snapped. Hand over the phone. Gavin looked around wildly, like a trapped animal. His eyes landed on Calvin, who was sitting quietly in the back row, his hands resting on his knees. Gavin's fear turned into a sudden, vicious rage. He pointed a shaking finger at my husband. This is him! Gavin screamed, his voice cracking. He is doing this. He is the one manipulating her. He is just a broke, worthless old man who needs a meal ticket. He doesn't even have a bank account. He is a leech. Your Honor, a poor old leech. The courtroom went dead silent. The insult hung in the air, ugly and raw. I looked at Calvin. He did not look angry. He did not look embarrassed. He simply stood up. His posture changed. The slight stoop of the tired old man evaporated. He buttoned his frayed jacket with a slow, deliberate movement that commanded more attention than Gavin's screaming. Your Honor? Calvin said. His voice was not loud, but it possessed a timbre that made the bailiff pause halfway to Gavin. I apologize for the disruption. But before you proceed with the phone imaging, I would like permission to submit one final piece of evidence regarding my identity and my true purpose here. The judge looked at him, intrigued by the sudden shift in his demeanor. You may approach, sir. Calvin walked to the front of the room. He did not look at Gavin. He placed his battered leather briefcase on the plaintiff's table. With a sharp click, he unlatched the locks. He did not pull out a utility bill or a character reference. He reached in and withdrew a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was stamped with a heavy, red wax seal. And right across the front, printed in bold, undeniable block letters, were the words, Department of Justice, Federal Task Force. Your Honor, my name is Calvin Sutter, my husband said. The room seemed to shrink, the air sucked out by the sheer weight of his voice. I am the founding partner of Sutter Meridian Holdings. Sutter Meridian. I knew that name. Everyone in finance knew that name. It was a private equity firm with assets that moved markets, wealth that could not be counted in normal terms. And the man standing next to me, the man Gavin had mocked for wearing flannel shirts and driving a rusted truck, was the ghost who ran it. For the last 18 months, Calvin continued, handing the heavy envelope to the bailiff. I have been acting as a confidential informant for a federal task force targeting predatory guardianship rings. We have been tracking a specific network that utilizes shell companies to drain the estates of widows. That network is run by Harbour Knot Consulting, and its primary legal enforcer is Mr. Leland Crowe. Leland tried to stand, but his legs seemed to fail him. Calvin did not stop. He placed a small flash drive on the bench. This drive contains audio recordings obtained under one-party consent laws, in which Mr. Whitaker and Mr. Crowe discussed the liquidation of my wife's assets prior to any medical diagnosis. Calvin said, his voice steady as stone. It also contains video footage of Mr. Whitaker illegally accessing her private accounts to fabricate evidence of dementia. Gavin looked at me, his eyes wide and wet with panic. He tried to lunge toward the railing. Mom. Please, I didn't know. I was just scared you were being scammed. I did it for you. Don't let them do this. Silence. The judge barked. She was looking at the tablet where the bailiff had uploaded Gavin's text messages from the seized phone. Mr. Whitaker, you are texting a contact named Shark about a 60-40 split once the house is sold. And here you discuss a script for alleging financial abuse by the spouse. It says here, make sure to emphasize he is poor. Judges hate deadbeats. Then, the doors at the back opened. Tessa walked in, holding a folder. She was sworn in quickly. She presented the fake debt agreement Gavin had forced her to sign years ago. He does not care about family. Your Honor, Tessa said, her voice shaking but clear. He cares about leverage. This is his pattern. He forges. He threatens. And he takes. The dominoes fell so fast I could barely breathe. 2 marshals stepped forward. Leland Crowe was cuffed first for violating bail conditions on a previous fraud charge in another state. Then, they turned to Gavin. As they pulled his hands behind his back, Gavin looked at me, begging with his eyes. The tears finally real. I walked over to him. I did not scream. I did not cry. I looked at him with a clarity that hurt worse than anger. You thought I was weak because I was lonely, I said softly, so only he could hear. You thought I was an easy target. But you forgot something. Gavin, I survived the worst days of my life when your father died, and I still got up and went to work. I am not a victim. I am the one who closed the book. Guardianship petition denied with prejudice. The judge announced, slamming the gavel. Mr. Whitaker is remanded into custody pending arraignment on charges of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. I took Calvin's hand. We walked out of the courtroom, leaving the chaos behind us. Outside, the sun was blinding. A sleek, black town car was waiting at the curb, not for the billionaire, but for us. I heard people in the crowd whispering, "Look at that poor old man. He got lucky." I just squeezed his hand and smiled. The game was over. It ended exactly where I wanted it to end, in the truth, in the light, and in the sound of handcuffs locking shut. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you enjoyed this, please drop a comment below and let me know where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts on Gavin's karma. Don't forget to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Stay safe out there.